Hello, Daniel here. Don't panic, this isn't because I did something controversial in one of these. At least I don't think I did. I just wanted to make a little note on sound quality stuff, especially after last week's episode. So, in this episode as well, there's some minor sound blips, not just the usual background noise of crickets, chair creaking, and window coverings. Although I'm working on all that too, I promise. Specifically in this episode, this weird clicking noise comes up a few times. I don't know what it is. I removed all of them that I could, but there is definitely still some in there. You should still be able to hear John and I just fine. I just wanted to apologize for any annoyance and assure you that I am continuously working on removing as much of that bothersome background noise as I can, as well as improving sound quality at a technical level so that clicking thing doesn't happen again either. So with that out of the way, onwards to the actual episode. Hello and welcome back to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss tales told across a whole bunch of different mediums. The only rule is that we can only discuss things in terms of storytelling. Anything like performances, art, mechanics, all of that is out unless it relates directly to how the story is conveyed. My name is Daniel Radford, author, person who is awake, and also your host, and I am joined once again by John Kernan as we continue with our cycle on friendship.
Being awake is good. I am also awake.
Yeah,
More awake than usual.
it's a very special episode because I'm recording in the middle of the day and it's midnight for John. We've flipped things around.
Yes.
Anyway, this episode we'll be discussing Eleceed, which is a Korean webcomic by. Well, I'm gonna butcher this name and I apologize in advance. It's like Jeho Son or Sun
Let's
and
see.
Xena or Zena.
I don't remember how it's spelled.
It is
Oh, yeah, I
Jeho,
think that
I
would
sort of.
just be Jeho-san,
Yeah,
but
I think that's
I'm not an
probably
expert on
correct.
Korean.
And Zeno or Zeno, who I think is the artist. Eleceed is an action series about sort of superpowered awakened ones, quotation marks, beating each other up. Like many similar stories, though, a lot of attention is paid to the way relationships between these people develop and the sort of bonds that grow
Yeah.
amongst them.
In
In
fact, I
fact,
would say it's the core of the story.
I was about to say the exact same thing. Look at
Hell yeah.
that. We're on the same wavelength and everything. Very fitting for the theme.
Yeah, you could say we're on the same page of this book.
A. So
Hey.
the story has arguably five main characters. Their names are Jiwoo, Jisuk, Subin, Wooin, and Kaden. Yes, one of those names. This is decidedly less Korean than the rest of them. It's because Kaden is also a mentor character who is from overseas, I believe. Full disclosure, John is not nearly as far into this as I am because I've made him like cram it over the last week.
Yeah, the story gets off to a pretty slow start. It's good. Just there's more pages per chapter than I would have expected. I'm only 31 chapters in.
Yeah, the story starts off slow enough that John has not actually met Subin yet.
I can already tell though that I already know enough, I should say, to say that like it's got a great idea of friendship. It's putting a lot more attention on men than women so far, but that's all.
That's a
It's
target
not
audience thing, partly, I think, to be honest. There are a decent number of female characters, but
just not where I am.
yeah. But in general, it's one of those webcomics that has a very expansive cast of fairly significant characters. So, in addition to those five main characters that I've already brought up, there's at least another six or seven important secondary characters, and then a bunch more beyond that in various tiers of importance, which means there is a lot of different relationships and relationship dynamics that we could potentially be looking into. We'll probably focus mostly on the main characters, but we'll see how things go. We'll see where the wind takes us.
Oh yeah. Especially Jisuk and or not Jisuk, sorry, Jiwoo and Kaden.
Which would, yeah, I mean, that is a good starting point, I think,
It
seeing
is
as
the
that
starting
it is
point.
also the starting point. So, our characters, Jiwoo and Kaden. Jiwoo is our introduction, our lens of naivety about this secret world because he had no idea he wasn't the only superpowered person in existence. He'd been keeping it secret for years upon years, and I can't remember the exact details, but basically, meeting Kaden is his impetus to get integrated more with this society and, finally find this place where he actually belongs, which is already very wholesome. Caden, by comparison, is a bit older. It's unclear exactly how old he is. He's in his 20s somewhere, I believe.
Yeah, he can't be that old, but he's also definitely not just like a child or a teenager like most of the other characters we've seen so far.
Yeah, so he is one of the most feared and powerful awakened ones in the world, effectively.
Seems to have been I haven't gotten to the full explanation of his backstory yet, but as far as I can tell, he seems to have been a prodigy from the beginning as far as awakened ones go.
Pretty much. And the way that the world of Awakened Ones works is it is largely political power is very prominent and things like that. There's lots of different organizations and things, but all of it really comes down to strength. Strength and the power of your abilities and your skill in combat and everything is very important to the sort of Awakened One culture. And Caden very much has embraced that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for him, he embraces it a little too much in a lot of ways, and that gets him quite hurt and forces him to sort of jam himself into the body of a cat for most of the story to recover and hide.
Not even jamming himself into the body of the cat. That's why it's almost weird that we don't see the cat again, because he actually copied the cat's
Yeah,
body. But yeah, like he has to hide. He finds a fat little cat sitting on a thing, and he's like, "Oh, nobody would notice, would pay any attention to you. I almost didn't." And I don't think he was actually thinking about it that much, because when he wakes up, he's actually quite surprised and also annoyed when he realizes he's in a fat cat,
and
or when he
also
is a fat cat.
really seems to have some problems uncatting himself for any length of time. So he's
Yeah,
done a number of sort of,
whatever. He almost seems to have done too good of a job transforming, because the cat form has become his default,
which yeah, he's
as
generally
evidenced
not
by the
thrilled
fact that
about.
like he doesn't just go back to normal the second he has any of his power back.
Yeah, so that's actually his sort of a big part of how he ends up meeting with and bonding with Jiwoo because Jiwoo is unabashedly a huge cat person. He doesn't have any necessarily, but he might as well because he takes care of so many strays, lets them into his house and everything. It's because they were his only
Yeah,
company for a long time.
yeah. Had a hard time, had a hard time making friends. Too afraid to spend too much time around other people his age, but cats were always there,
Yeah, so
so he grew to love
already
cats.
already we have two very different characters developing this sort of very respectful friendship. To be fair, we have Jiwoo, who is very good at being empathetic and just human and kind,
Is a
and
cinnamon bun.
he is a yeah. If you were going to call any character a cinnamon bun, Jiwoo is the one. Compared to Kaden, who's lived a very lonesome existence, but by choice for the most part because of how aggressive he is in this world of awakened ones and everything.
Not just aggressive, but also his ego,
And
because
also, he does
he
have a massive ego.
he is very much in on his own Kool-Aid. Hell, I mean, the dude is so in on his own Kool-Aid that even though we have reason to believe fairly early on that he's a pretty good person, whenever he gets too excited thinking about just how great he is, he literally tackles maniacally into the air like a supervillain. He
Very
can't
good.
hold
So
it in.
the great Caden's great Caden flavored Kool Aid.
Yes, exactly. Nothing else is good enough for the Great Caden. What's
Except,
he gonna drink? Regular Kool-Aid?
you see, that's one of the things that is interesting because Jiwoo intrigues him in a lot of ways. because he's such an opposite, he's so nice, so kind. He's not a pacifist, but he doesn't seek conflict necessarily. He's a very chill person. He's a bit of a doormat, to be honest.
And
But
despite himself, Jiwoo did help him out when he could have still been in serious danger, and he's not one to just ignore that.
absolutely, Kaden definitely operates on a code. What is interesting though is that Jiwoo, once he learns about the World of Awakened Ones and all that, is he is able to learn very quickly and adapt very quickly to that world, which and become very skilled very quickly, largely in part because his mentor is Caden. But it provides all of this provides a very very interesting and very positive generally framework for the relationship they build up because Caden is able to learn empathy and humanity to an extent from Jiwoo, whilst Jiwoo is able to learn proactiveness and assertiveness from
He also
Caden.
learns catmanity.
That humility is something he's still working on.
He's getting there. He's improving.
I mean, it is true. He mellows out quite a lot throughout. He never loses his cadenness, but he definitely mellows out a lot from his earlier appearances over time. And I think that's fantastic. It's a really good example of how a healthy dynamic can be good for people.
Yeah.
You know, they have a relationship built on mutual respect and loyalty, and they have a lot to learn from each other, which even with before we add in any of the other characters, that already in and of itself makes for an excellent, healthy dynamic to set as the core of a story where despite all the action and violence, it really is the friendships and relationships and all that is so much the center of it.
Absolutely. It's hard to overstate how influential the relationship is. Story really wouldn't be the same way without it. And there's an element there that's really strong in general because so far every like it's one thing the story's been doing that's been pretty interesting is how so far for the most part it's been so positive in that like almost every major character Jiwoo's met so far except for like one has not only been like for the most part a pretty good person, but somebody he connects with pretty soon after meeting them. Well, that's nice.
Yeah, a very consistent trait, like a through line through the story, is that almost everyone else, in fact, yeah, pretty much everyone else that Jiwoo meets has been raised in this world, in this very, combative, violent, power centric world of the Awakened Ones, whilst Jiwoo hasn't. So he's grown up learning empathy, sympathy, social skills that a lot of the others just haven't, where his world hasn't been power centric. And because of that, when he enters this world, he's kind of a breath of fresh air because it's not like he's not weak. He's absurdly powerful, all things considered, especially as he trains more and learns more over time. But
But he's not so concerned with his own power.
he's not. Yeah, it's not the be all and end all for him. He is just considerate and forgiving and nice to people, and it's so different to what all these people have lived with for the most part that it's incredibly easy for them to get pulled into his orbit because it's the kind of relationship that they're not getting anywhere else. And because of that, he makes people better by being there, just by association. He functions very much in the way a Paragon character should, where they are interesting and fundamental to the story, not necessarily because of who they are, but because of who they are to everyone else in the story. They're a
Yeah,
role model
that's
and an
very true.
inspiration, and Jiwoo is like that. He is pretty much
The
a
guy
model
that Jiwoo,
Paragon hero.
I like that Jiwoo kid. He's gonna go places.
It's funny because it is a bit of a cliche in certain circles and types of story, right? Where a lot of a characters' friend groups start out as enemies,
True.
and Eleceed plays that pretty much completely straight,
Yep.
with the exception of Caden. Pretty much every single person in Jiwoo's immediate friend group was at one point, if not an outright enemy, at least an antagonistic force in their lives. In his life, I should say. Jisuk started out basically being a bully.
Yeah. Hell, leader of his own little fucking posse, even.
Yeah.
Excuse my language. I don't know why I'm a little potty mouth right now. But yeah, like
Yeah,
the only
they're.
Jisuk is, I will admit, one of the weird little points for me so far in the story, because I'm like, how come right away you seem like you're not really like that bad a guy, but you call these people your friends who will literally go around and would break into a classroom to gang up and beat the crap out of somebody with a broken leg?
Well, part of that, and I mean, he explores this a little himself down the line, is that he's also led a very power centric, lonesome existence growing up in the world he has, especially with the expectations. There's that creaking chair again. Especially with the expectations that have been. Let's try that again. I'm gonna not move. Especially with the expectations that have been placed on him because he is the brother of the leader of one of the major Awakened One groups in Korea. So his everything is power
Yeah.
centric for him, and
Life can be hard sometimes when your sister's really strong and hot.
so for a lot, like that's been his idea of how the world works. So
It is
even so,
something that's supposed to be said.
he applies that same logic to how he functions outside of Awakened One situations, where he still focuses entirely on the power dynamic. These guys follow him because he's strong. He picks on people because he is more powerful than them, and that's just how the world he grew up in works. Meeting Jiwoo and briefly getting the snot kicked out of him, that sort of wakes him up
Well,
because
I wouldn't
what?
say getting the snot kicked out of him. I would say finally getting hit real good.
That's fair. That in their rematch, I'm pretty sure Jiwoo wins.
Kinda. He knocks him down, but he's not out, and Jiwoo is way more wounded than him.
Okay, it's been a while. But yeah,
Jiwoo
basically,
had to go to the hospital. So
that's fair. Yeah, basically, he meets someone who not only stands up to him and puts up a fight, but who remains forgiving and kind despite that. And that is an eye opener for him. Because it's like,
yeah,
that can be a thing? You can be powerful and nice to people? What? And he
how do
ditches
you
the bully
know?
guys. You know,
Oh,
they go and, like, they pick a fight with someone at some point, and they come to him and they're like, hey, can you help us? He's basically just, nah.
tired of picking on weaker people.
Yeah, pretty much. He's like, let's be real. You guys are just using me because I make you stronger by default by being the like leader of this little gang, and people are less likely to mess with you, and you get away with more because I'm there. You're using me for that, and I'm using you to have some facsimile of a social life, and now I can have that in a healthy way without the expectations, without the power plays, without the bullshit. I'm just gonna cut you toxic fuckers loose, basically.
Good for him.
Yeah, and he never stops being a bit of a jerk ass, but he's a jerk with a heart of gold.
Mm,
He is. But despite that, he's like, despite his douchier personality elements, he is very protective, especially of Jiwoo, and very loyal.
yeah. Also honorable. In his very first dust up with Ji Woo, despite how completely one-sided it is, yet he's ready to beat him up, if only because he already beat up his friends. The second he detects that he realizes that Ji Woo was already hurt before they started, he instantly stops and is like, I'm not gonna fight someone who's hurt. I'm out of here.
Yeah. Interestingly, I feel like comparatively to Jiwoo, Jisuk is actually very similar to Kaden,
They have a
which
lot in common.
makes sense. So yeah, that's the relationship between Jiwoo and Jisuk, which it's notable that although it has very similar foundations to what Kaden and Jiwoo have, Jisuk is also kind of the first person that Jiwoo has as a friend who is an equal, which changes things up a little bit because despite how strong and his friendship with Kaden is, Caden is older, he is his mentor. So there is a power imbalance there, and there is that sort of lack of casual to sort of hang out there, sort of. He's usually around being a cat, but they don't really just chill, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, like Caden's ego won't allow it to a point, but it's also really just because Caden is so serious that a lot of the time when Jiwoo is just hanging out, Caden is on the prowl looking around. Even when he is relaxing and not doing anything, he is trying to be ready.
Absolutely, and yeah, and again, like the whole dynamic of their friendship, it very much is a friendship. It's not all professionalism. They get along very well. They trust each other a lot. They do talk, but they don't have casual chit chat. That's not their vibe. So, introducing Jisuk, who is also more experienced in that world of Awakened Ones, potentially, but who is
Is
more of an
Jiwoo's
equal. Uh,
who, you know, unlike Caden, who Jiwoo has given a good decking to.
yeah. Uh,
Sometimes that's the best way to become friends with someone. It's true.
Stories Across Borders does not condone violence unless.
Stories Across Borders does not condone real violence. It very strongly condones fictional violence that is not trying to spread dark and unpleasant messages.
Fictional violence is encouraged.
Fictional violence is necessary.
But yeah, so again, very different dynamic between Jiwoo and Jisuk because of that sort of equality. Even though they have similar lessons to learn from each other, as Jiwoo and Kaden do in a lot of ways, because it's coming from very different places, things are the general vibe of that relationship is quite different.
I also like what we've got so far between Jiwoo and I don't know if it would be closer to Win or Woo In, but
I think it's Wooin.
because I haven't gotten to spend a lot of time seeing them talk so far, but Wu In starts out being so aloof because he already knows he's into some bad shit he shouldn't be, and he really just wants to get it done and continue being loyal to the person who's saved him and got him to where he is
Basically
in
raised
life.
him.
But he also really but while being loyal to that, he also doesn't want to hurt anybody he doesn't have to. So he just tries to have like no human contact at all, from what I saw, and just gets on with his life. He's a very kind and caring person, as evidenced by the fact that even though he is still working with Dr. Delane, who is performing these fucked up experiences, he also finds ways to save as many of those animals that get tested on as possible, including like basically faking their deaths and then taking them to a nearby animal hospital when he's supposed to be quote unquote getting rid of the bodies.
Yeah, Wooin is temperament wise a lot more similar to Jiwoo than other characters introduced. He's done and been involved in some pretty nasty shit just by virtue of the fact that he was raised by someone who is largely amoral. You know,
You can't trust anybody with the name Delane.
he he he's also lived a very isolated existence because it was just him and the Doctor on the run all the time. And he shares that loyalty originally placed in the Doctor, so to the point he is willing to compromise his personal beliefs and go against his natural temperament and things like that to hurt people or defend the Doctor or whatever. To the point that when he is introduced, we largely just see a very empty, cold antagonist. It isn't until after Wooin is sort of eventually defeated and it is met you largely with understanding and forgiveness that we start to see more of who he actually is, more of that kind temperament he's got, more of the fact he's just a quiet guy.
It
He's not
especially doesn't hurt that
emotionless. He's just quiet.
from moment one, Jiwoo is undeniably on Wooin's side. And
Absolutely, yeah.
wants to be on his side even. Their first real interaction is Jisuk's fucking cronies. There's the language again. Getting like trying to bully him, and they don't even actually have a real reason either. They legit just see that he's a loner and he's wearing glasses. So
And
they
he's
essentially
quiet,
walk
yeah.
up to him and be like, "Hey, nerd, you look ready to get shoved in a locker." And he doesn't do a damn thing. He is so committed to his lack of human contact that he is actually just going to sit there and let them do whatever they want, partially because of his commitment and also partially because he's awakened and they're not. So if they beat on him, they're not going to hurt him that much, and he'll heal from whatever they do quickly because awakened ones kind of go by the same, a very similar rule to wizards in sorry, no, well, yeah, wizards in fairy tale, if you will, in that having the awakened abilities doesn't just give you whatever ability you has, it also makes you, at least to a point, physically superhuman.
Yeah, I
They're
mean,
more durable, they heal faster, yada yada.
you see a lot of that in like superhero comics and stuff as well, where the average person is very fragile, but most of the like protagonists and the villains, any super character, even the ones who don't explicitly have a healing factor or increased durability, have a healing factor and increased durability. It's kind of like that. Awakened ones basically exist in a
Sometimes
comic
that's
book
just an
world.
inconsistency. But in here, the story does have the courtesy to
Yes.
out tell us that awakened ones are more durable and have a healing factor.
Yeah. So yeah, for Wowen, it's not just that he's against the contact. That is very much a big thing with him. Is that he just tries to avoid people in general. To
But they're not
even
really
even
a
when
threat to
even when he
him.
wants yeah, even when he wants contact, he foregoes it for the sake of Doctor Delane and their
Yep.
safety. So that is definitely a part of it. But also because he is so gentle and kind, of course he's not going to fight back because he would absolutely destroy these idiots.
Yeah, and on top of that, like, what are they going to do to him? Anything they could possibly do to him themselves, he'll be better in, like, at most after a night of rest.
There's
So,
no threat to him compared to how big of a threat he is to them just by virtue of existing, and he's trying to keep a low profile. So there's all these reasons he just won't fight back. But Jiwoo doesn't know he's awakened, so he just sees this guy, this very quiet, lonesome guy who's just taking all this shit, and he's like, "Yo, why?"
what the heck?
Yeah,
And so and the funny thing is, it doesn't even have anything to do with, like, a sense of justice or Jiwoo's own power yet. He's just straight up like, "Hey guys, what are you doing over there? That's not cool. Come
yeah.
on."
He's just
Like,
a good dude.
and so that's their very first interaction. And in their next interaction,
They have that
their
moment
next
of,
real
"Oh, we're
interaction, I should
enemies."
say.
Oh,
But despite that, Wooin is still forced to see Jiwoo like wanting to be on his side. And between that and the realization that like he's not who they thought he might be, like, even though this is only like the second, maybe third time they've met, Wooin is already willing to put himself on the line, even though he knows Dr. Delane is kind of crazy and is going to see it as a serious betrayal, and tries to protect Jiwoo because he really can't stand to see somebody he knows is just a nice person being treated this way, especially over nothing. Because the only reason they come into conflict at all is because Dr. Delane was experimenting on cats, and like Jiwoo knows that cat, and he's like, "Oh, I want to take this little guy home. He's not doing good."
yeah. It's very interesting the way they fit, like the way their dynamic is compared to the other characters, because I feel like with with the other like core members of this growing friend group, the thing they have in common is their awakened one status. That's the sort of starting point for their relationships. But with Wooin, it's not. It's their shared humanity and gentleness that is the sort of foundation of their friendship. Most of that core group of characters personality-wise, very different to Jiwoo, at least in temperament. But Wooin is also quiet and kind and gentle and friendly. In fact, arguably more so than Wooin is. Jiwoo is.
Yeah, because Jiwoo is, how do I put this? Jiwoo is more passively all those things. That's just who he is. Whereas Wu In, on top of naturally being that way, is also like actively making an effort to be a good influence on people and to do good things. Whether that's up to how strong his morals and sense of justice are, or like possibly a sense of guilt that he has to do what he can to make the world a better place because he's already had a hand in making it worse, is up to interpretation to a point at least. But like either way, Jiwoo just does good, nice things by being himself, and Woo-in is actively trying to do everything he can to make things better.
I would say that's a reasonably fair assessment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, wow, Woo-in, protective. Like they fun. I like the little switch around they have of like when Woo-in first goes to get back to like doing the experiments and stuff after having been like seen. Jiwoo is all worried, like, oh man, why has he not been coming to school? Blah blah blah. Only for us to go straight to like, oh, now after getting hurt, after Jiwoo gets hurt, Woo-in is the one sitting there when he finally gets back, and he's like, why isn't Jiwoo in class?
Yeah.
And then runs into Jisuk. And soon as he realizes, as soon as he beats up Jisuk's little cronies, uh, for saying that they attacked or because he finds out that they attacked Jiwoo, he beats them up and is like, yeah, now now I gotta find, and then Jisuk shows up at that moment and like just instantly Wooin goes full on serious, like with murder in his eyes. What did you do to the cinnamon bun?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like one of the few things Jisuk and Wooin have in common in the end is that they are both end up being very protective of Jiwoo.
Jiwoo's smile must be protected.
Damn right.
In the words of most characters in Eleceed, I just met Jiwoo yesterday, and already, if anything happened to him, I would kill everybody else in the room and then myself.
Yeah, I mean, he is 100% essential to that group of characters. That friend
Yeah,
group would not exist without him, and without him but creating that group by virtue of just being who he is, they would all be alone.
true. That's not something to be ignored.
Okay, so that's the sort of basic building blocks of all the characters you're familiar with. We're going to take a minute now to get into hypothetical land for you because we're going to talk a little bit, just a tiny bit about Subin.
This is fine. Tell me about her. We can
Her
talk about their
introduction.
relationship and their dynamics and stuff without spoiling story bits for me.
Yeah, well, her introduction is not as an antagonist for Jiwoo. She's not friendly with him necessarily, but she's introduced as an antagonist slash rival for Jisuk.
Oh,
Because they are two of the most recognized powerful awakened ones in the country. They're both members of the sort of the top four, and they're both part of the two most powerful organizations, who are
that
sort of
makes
like the
sense.
next gen coming up in the ranks. So they have a history of rivalry already, and it's very antagonistic. So when she's introduced, it's as an antagonist for Jisuk, and again, largely because of Jiwoo's influence, eventually she just ends up just hanging around the group. Like, it's it's funny. Like, it's almost like there's no real conscious decision to do it. She just does, just start showing up more and hanging around that group until eventually her and her dynamic in the group kind of she in a lot of ways fills the same role as Jisuk because they have very similar personalities. So they're not really foils for each other. They're both foils for the other members of the group in the same way. But because of where they're from and their history and the personalities they have, they are still super competitive with each other to the point they embody a trope. They eventually embody a trope that is called vitriolic best buds, which I guarantee everyone listening to this knows those people, even if they didn't know there was a trope name for it. It's those two people who are always fighting and arguing. They're always trying to screw the other one over, but they would fucking die for each other.
Everybody needs some of that in their life.
And they, because of that dynamic, are largely one of the biggest sources of comedy going forward in the story. Is the bullshit they get up to. But the thing is, they have that dynamic towards each other, but just because of who they are, they will also by default team up against other people to give them shit until their unspoken alliance inevitably breaks down again because they start messing with each other. In particular, they seem to have a shared love of depriving Wooin of his favorite food.
Oh, that's just mean.
Wooin, as it turns out, is obsessed with I don't know how to pronounce it. It's like Jang Jang Myeon or Jung Jung Myeon or something like that. I don't know what it is. I think it's a noodle dish. He
Oh,
loves that
noodles.
shit
Hell yeah.
and asks for it every time they're ordering food. Uh, and they both thoroughly enjoy depriving him of that love.
Brutal.
To be fair, they also do horrible things to each other. Subin does not like spicy food. I guess it's a joke because haha ice powers. So Jisuk is constantly ordering her dish extra spicy. It's that sort of thing, but it feels very real. It's the sort of thing you could definitely see a group of teenage friends doing to each other.
True.
But yeah, so that's how she fits into that group. She's not a foil for Jisuk, because they are very similar people. She joins him in being like a twin foil for Jiwoo and Wooin. And they have that sort of vitriolic best buds sort of comedic rivalry relationship.
Oh,
But also, she ends up being very protective of Jiwoo, so there you go. So they all have that in common. Everyone in that group will absolutely destroy you if you become a problem for Jiwoo. Even though he does not need anyone to defend him.
yeah, but he's nice.
Yeah, that's the
So,
thing. Like, they all recognize him as an equal at this point and recognize his power. In fact, I'm pretty sure at one point both Subin, or is it Subin and Jiwoo? I don't remember. I think Jisuk at least. There's a point where Jiwoo gets into a fight with another one of those top four guys, who is more of an enemy, more of an antagonist character for real, I guess, for a while. And Jisuk actually brags about Jiwoo beating him up.
eh,
just as a like show of support to this other guy, like, yeah, dude, you are fucked. He kicked the crap out of me. It's such a change up. But yeah, so that's the sort of basic dynamics of the group and how they all sort of fit in with each other. Caden isn't so much attached to the others. They don't know that he is the cat. They do later on meet him as Caden, but the others other than Jiwoo don't really have like a direct relationship with him. They know him as the weirdly scary fat cat and as this powerful awakened who happens to be Jiwoo's teacher, who they are kind of in awe of. But they don't have any like real relationship there.
nobody has the right to the privileged information that the great Caden is a fat cat.
Cassian nitrate. Have you gotten to that bit?
Cassian nitrate.
I can't
Oh,
remember.
he was so mad.
I'm pretty sure that I think that's a riff on the chemical formula for like animal fat. I'm
That
not
would make it
totally
funnier.
sure on that.
I hope that's true. That would make it way funnier.
But yeah, so that's the like basic dynamics of this group, and that group and the way they get along and the way that Jiwoo's just niceness kind of extends out is great. I like it a lot. And one of the reasons I like it, right, is that a lot of the time when stories pull that sort of thing, it feels very contrived.
True.
You know, when you just keep beating people up until they're all your friend. Like, I feel like that's something that a lot of stories do not do well. They just find an excuse to get an antagonist on the same side. You can do that well. You can get two people who hate each other, give them a common cause, and watch them bond over time, and that can be fantastic. But it's often done in a very contrived way, compared to Eleceed, where it happens very naturally, and you never feel like it's forced, and it never gets old either. Is the thing. Because of who Jiwoo is and who the people he interacts with are, and because of their circumstances and the slight differences in those circumstances as well, it never feels like too repetitive that is how his relationships play out. It always feels believable and it is always engaging to watch happen.
Yeah, so far I've been enjoying the character interactions a lot, especially almost everything involving Inhyuk. He's a real one.
Inhyuk
Now that's one name I might butcher because
yeah,
I don't
I'm
I can't
also
think of a
not
better way
totally
to
sure
pronounce
on that
that.
one, but he is one of the best secondary characters because he is very friendly and supportive of all the young ones, and has a shared love of cats with Jiwoo to the point that he is actually more obsessive about cats than Jiwoo is.
Yeah, and they also do a really interesting deal for moment one of making him look almost making him first appear almost as if he's some sort of creepy government agent who knows too much and is watching the main characters and could mess them up at any moment,
Which he could.
only to like almost immediately reveal himself to be really nice and to legitimately have only showed up because he was worried about Jiwoo and he wanted to take care of the new awakened one discovered in their territory and make sure he was okay. Like,
Yeah. He's just a nice guy who happens to be, I think, one of the top 10 awakened ones in Korea, anyway.
still kind of weirds me out that he has the same power as the U's, even though
I think
he's not related to them.
it's not a by blood thing, right? The way I understand it, because it is a very vague power system, annoyingly so at times, is
It's very
that
soft.
it's not a thing passed down by blood. It's you may have like a natural inclination to a certain thing, perhaps, but you can learn different powers and things like that, and different organizations pass down their power set, what they call force control, through their ranks. So you have like a whole group whose thing is gravity, a whole group whose thing is wind, and a whole group whose thing is ice. I expect Jiwoo's kind of an outlier to all those people because he just it grew into his natural inclination for speed
He didn't have a choice.
because he wasn't part of a group.
He
He wasn't taught. Yeah,
he never had any awakened ones. He never had any training, no anything. So
he's getting
he
trained now.
developed what he developed, and I get the idea that maybe we're gonna fit a little bit of lightning into that at some point, since it can be learned.
Yes, well that would make sense since Caden, his teacher, his thing is lightning.
And
It's one of the
that
things
he
that makes him
also
terrifying because
and
lightning
also
is
that he
very
has
powerful.
already literally shared some of his power
Hmm.
with which I think actually where I am at so far in the story may be one of the best signs we've actually been given so far of just how talented uh Caden is. Because we have shown no sign that that's a normal thing for an awakened one to be able to do, just like share their power with someone else.
Or turn into a cat by fucking around with your like bodily makeup.
Hey, listen, I mean, cats have electricity in their bodies, just like I mean, yeah, the
I
cat
think
thing,
they justified it as him messing around with like his body's like makeup using electricity to screw with the way things bond together and stuff.
yeah,
It's a very
and
thin
of course,
justification, but it kind of works if you're willing to not pay too much attention to it.
yeah, and of course the cat thing, true, for sure. But we also we see that right away. I mentioned the power sharing thing because that's so much more subtle. You just go like, oh yeah, the really strong, talented guy. He's gonna put a little bit of his power
Yeah,
into somebody else. Yeah, it makes
it's
sense.
yeah.
But we've seen, even just where I am already, we've seen so many situations where it could have been advantageous or made sense for other awakened people to have done that with each other, and nobody else has, which leads me to believe it's a pretty rare thing.
Yeah, no,
So another good sign of Caden's talent is that that's not something that even these super talented people, these other really strong people, are just walking around and do.
yeah, I mean, it's not only a sign of his skill and his power, but it's also a very, very nice way to show the growing trust and bond he has in his student.
Well, I guess the thing the moment I'm thinking of happened really early on before they had bonded that much. But
True, but it's
I would
still
say it was
fairly
already a
symbolic of
good
that.
sign that there was something there.
Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah,
Especially when
for
you
sure.
learn like later on that just like you probably haven't learned too much about this yet, but an organization or an individual's like special force control method that they use to like develop their certain skill set power set is generally a very closely guarded secret.
Yeah,
So it's a big deal that Kaiden has been willing to share all that with Jiwoo. And any time going forward that anything even touches upon that is a big deal. Because it basically shows that Jiwoo's attitude and openness and empathy and kindness is actively changing the like structure of Awakening One society, at least in Korea.
I look forward to more of that because it's been good so far.
Yeah, I just love how they handle friendships and things in this story. Like they make them matter in a way that doesn't feel contrived or cheesy.
It's important. It's not the easiest thing to do.
Like they don't do any like big because you're my friend speeches or anything like that. They just acknowledge their shit and act on it, and it's great, and it feels very natural and believable. It doesn't come off as cliche, even though they do very much embody a lot of common tropes in this kind of story.
Very true.
But even beyond that, I think one of my favorite things that Eleceed does, and there's another hint by the way, the story's called Eleceed. But one of my favorite things it does is that it frequently, even like when things start getting more and more intense in later chapters, just gives the characters time to on screen just hang out. It is very common to see them all like gathered at Jiwoo's place ordering takeout and stuff,
Which is good.
and just
It's
and just screwing around and bonding, and it's great.
it's always something more stories need. Not enough stories give their characters time to actually just hang out, do nothing of special consequence.
Yeah, I mean, some stories it wouldn't work if they were doing that, perhaps. But yeah, for these guys, it's huge because not only does it help us get to know the characters more as an audience and makes us care about them more because we see them more as people than walking plot devices, but it also just makes the friendships they have feel more believable because in a lot of especially like action based stories, especially these very bombastic fantastical ones, you don't often see these characters just hanging around. So when they talk about how close they are and how important they are to each other, or go on vengeance tirades or whatever because one of their friends was injured or whatever, any of that stuff, it can be very hard to believe, right? Because a lot
Yeah,
of those stories don't show anything that indicates these people are actually that close. I as maligned as the movie often is, I think one of my favorite things in the MCU, right, that huge monolith, is that a bit early on in Age of Ultron, where the core Avengers and all of their affiliates and all that are just having an after party and shooting the shit and relaxing after a big mission.
yeah,
That one
yeah.
scene is still putting in work by the time like Endgame comes around.
Yeah, everybody was always a big fan of the little trip to Shawarma Town.
Yeah, exactly. Little stuff like that. You don't need to include a lot of it, especially if you don't have a lot of like runtime or if you don't have a lot of room for it in your book or whatever. But just including a handful of scenes throughout a story like that does wonders for how much you care about characters and for how much you believe they care about each other.
Yeah, it really does.
And Eleceed is fantastic at that because even when it's part of like something else happening, like people, the main characters and also some auxiliary characters, right? They are always just hanging around, eating noodles and fucking around with each other, pranking each other, talking, chilling.
Living life, being
Usually in
real one.
Jiwoo's place, frequently in hospital rooms.
You know, people end up in the hospital sometimes in this line of work.
They have a lot of car crashes.
Sometimes cars gonna crash.
Have you
That was one of the things that
have
got
you
to me
gone
right
through that?
away.
Have you gotten through that running joke now?
It hasn't become a running joke yet where I am, but it's definitely already been made a couple of times.
For those who are unaware of it, because of the natural violence of the World of Awakened Ones, the core characters are frequently getting quite badly injured, and but they still have like school and regular person responsibilities. So they'll be like showing up to class all together, all wounded, with like broken bones and things, and every time they're like, "Yeah, we had another car crash," and it's consistently funny
It is. It's
because
definitely.
it's completely unclear whether their like teacher buys this at all. But what's he gonna do about it? So he just kind of
Not
has
much
to
you
accept
can
it and
do.
move on.
Yep, not much to do. I mean, the teacher is also like a surprisingly good guy.
Yeah, Alice definitely does something that is very different to a lot of similar stories in that most of the people in its world are fundamentally not bad people. Even the ones who are antagonistic or villainous are mostly like that just by as a byproduct of the environment that they exist in. And almost all of them, as soon as given the chance, usually by meeting Jiwoo, are willing to show better sides of themselves. It's
Yeah,
it really does have a it has its moments for sure, but there is a like there are definitely some unredeemable characters, but there's not that many of them. It has an overall very uplifting and very positive and hopeful tone, but it does that without completely shaking off the fact. Like it does that without failing to acknowledge the violence and the drama of the world the story has created.
yeah,
Uh,
it does a pretty good job of it too.
it's impressive that it can manage to not shy away at all from that violence, but still maintain that very positive feel. And the reason it manages to do that so much comes back down to the interactions of that core group of characters, the way they support each other, the way sometimes they just hang out.
Sometimes people are just gonna hang out.
Anyway, that is probably as deep into that as we can go without me spoiling everything for a person who's still reading the story, and I think that's roughly our usual runtime anyway. So we will leave that one there.
I knew we could do it.
We did it! Woo! Next week
Jiwoo.
oh no. Next week we will be
Oh, yes.
concluding our cycle on friendship in stories with a reading of something I've written, as always, and a follow up discussion. Until then, you can find more of what I do here on radfordwrites.com or by following me over at DanielWrites7 on Twitter. As always, you will see plenty more of John around because he is going to be not only in more episodes of this, but he's in plenty of other things I do.
Yeah, I like doing things and being in things.
And I tolerate him. And on that note, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.